Thanks so much again. And we are transitioning to AI MarOps. Patrick Spichelski, welcome to the show. Hey, you're on mute.
Horrible. Appreciate you having me on. How's it going?
Patrick is the co-founder of the Keln, and it's one of our favorite clay experts and clay agencies. What's the latest and greatest touch?
Awesome. Pumped to be doing this and appreciate you having me on. Just to double check, you can hear me fine and everything, right?
Yeah,
Okay, incredible. Well, yeah, my plan today is of course to walk everybody through Clay, what it can be used for specifically in MarOps and some of the incredible use cases I think can be carried along with the tool. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly and do a quick rundown on Clay as a whole. And then I'm going to talk a bit more specifically about how you can use Clay in MarOps to specifically use AI to kind of like, let's say, supercharge a lot of your marketing workflows. So I will go ahead and share my screen now. One moment. All right. Okay. So, I learned a little too quickly that Figma already has a presentation feature, so this is in a Fig Jam, but nonetheless, I think it's going to just be a quick high-level overview on what Clay is, what Clay can do, what use cases you can carry it out for, and then I'm going to go into some specific examples as to why you should be using Clay relative to other tools out there in the AI marketing space. As I'm sure most of you have seen, there are a million tools that are being pitched to you day to day on LinkedIn, obviously through Google SEO, kind of to the point of the topic before, and all the other channels. And of course, it's hard to kind of wade your way through the noise. So of course, I'm a bit biased towards Clay, and this is kind of my pitch towards their product and specifically why you should be using it for marketing. So what is Clay? As you can see in like the kind of blurb below, it's an AI-enabled workflow tool with incredible data enrichment capabilities, specifically built for marketing and sales teams. And I'll kind of walk through this later, but I would argue it has the best data enrichment capabilities of any tool out there on the market, and you will see why shortly. I think a good way to think of it for those who haven't actually used Clay before is that it's kind of like Google Sheets and Zapier, plus a combination of all of your favorite data enrichment tools, all kind of woven into one platform. And as we walk through the platform, you'll see kind of how this makes sense. So going down to this, what can Clay specifically do for growth teams? So I would say Clay, for those who've maybe seen it on LinkedIn or seen a lot of content about it, is seen primarily a lot of the time as a sales tool or a sales enablement tool. But what I think people often ignore is kind of the wide variety of marketing slash growth slash MarOps use cases that can also be created and discovered within the tool. So some quick things it can do. The first thing is it turns your tech stack into an ecosystem of tools that actually communicate with each other well. So what do I mean by that? So I would say in marketing and sales and I would say most realms today, there are a lot of tools that all kind of do separate functions and separate things. So while you may have kind of a general source of truth for these tools, like a HubSpot or a Salesforce, oftentimes even those central sources of truths don't really speak to each other super well. Data is really cluttered, it's stale, it's unupdated, it's not normalized, and it's really hard to actually act upon data that you're finding in these tools. Which leads to the second point, which is it helps you find more data on the people and companies that you're targeting. So let's just say, for example, you're hosting a webinar like this one and you have a bunch of attendees, and you don't really know which ones could be potentially good customers for your service or your product. Clay can help you find more data on those people or companies and then eventually lead score them to figure out who you actually should be reaching out to. And then the third thing is just generally automate growth processes that would take a lot of work. This is kind of why, tying back to the Zapier comparison, I compare it to that tool specifically because you're able to automate a wide variety of complex processes using the tool that allow you to get things done a lot quicker. So this is the last visual before we kind of just get into me actually showing you how this thing works. So I figured this would actually be somewhat valuable to just kind of give you a general idea as to where Clay lies in the tech stack universe. I would define it mostly as an intermediary. So something that kind of falls between the source of your leads. So a bunch of marketing initiatives, for example, and then where those leads eventually go. So you could say a marketing tool like Marketo or HubSpot or to custom ad audiences like LinkedIn and Amazon. And the main purpose Clay serves is as an enrichment, lead scoring, data cleaning, qualification, and deep research tool. So something that you can use to find more information on the people that you're kind of, let's say, aggregating or collecting through your different marketing initiatives before sending them programmatically somewhere else. So let's just say, for example, you're getting dozens of Calendly bookings a day, maybe even hundreds if you're more like a mid-market to enterprisey company. And you're trying to find a way of kind of sorting through those and researching them, both to send research docs to your sales team and to figure out if you actually want to take the call that somebody booked with you. Clay does an incredible job of finding really niche, nuanced information on these people and companies, and then allowing you to score leads based on that information. And then, of course, can send that information, whether it's to your HubSpot, where you have your salespeople working, to Marketo to figure out who's supposed to go into specific campaigns, et cetera, et cetera. So there are a variety of ways Clay can be used. I didn't mean to make this kind of like a logo dump visual. Hopefully that it doesn't kind of come off that way, but I wanted to at least demonstrate kind of how it lies in the world of tech. So moving on to a few different examples. So I'm going to stop sharing and then share a new screen really quickly and show you quickly how Clay works and then a few examples of what we've done in the tool. So this first one actually is just a untitled Clay workbook, as you can see, because I wanted to quickly show you kind of how Clay works. So as I showed from the visual previously, the best way to describe Clay is as an intermediary, which means you have to send data into Clay in some way. So there are a few different ways you can do this. The first thing is that Clay has its own native data that you can use to find people or companies. So like, let's say, for example, I click find people. This tab pops up right here, and you can put in a bunch of different filters, similar to like an Apollo or a Zoom Info, and then eventually find a list of people. So let's just say, for example, I wanted to find people with the founder job title that are based in New York City, just to keep it very simple. And I will throw in that information, click preview, and a bunch of people will pop up, and hopefully it loads quick enough for this not to be redundant. Okay, awesome. So yeah, there's like 41,000 people that show up immediately, right? So you're like, okay, great, you can import them into a new table. There are a variety of really cool other sources, though, specifically marketing specific, that I would also check out. So if you click more sources here, you can scroll down. I think there's a lot of great social ones specifically. So you could pull in people mentioning your brand on LinkedIn. You could find mentions on Reddit. You can pull in social media influencers in the Clay, and it can find all this information programmatically. And I think it's also worth noting kind of how Clay does this, right? And this is kind of going back to the Clay has better data than anybody else point. The reason I can definitively say Clay has better data than any other tool on the market is because it doesn't have its own data. It's using an aggregation of every data provider in the world. So it either natively integrates with any data provider that you use, or you can connect it externally to connect any other data provider that might not natively integrate with Clay. So you can imagine like you can waterfall literally every email finder or every phone number finder to find information on people. And even if you can't find data through those providers, as I'll show you in a second, you can find them using AI agents and other cool AI tools. So I'm going to quickly show an example of how I did this for a client of ours. Actually, I think this one was just for a LinkedIn post because I didn't want to show off too many client workflows. I felt like that was probably some sort of IP issue. Nonetheless, you can see what a Clay table looks like when you import leads into it. So it looks like a spreadsheet, but the main difference is that these columns that have logos on them are not static columns like you would see in a spreadsheet. They're actually columns that you use to enrich people or companies. So quickly before I walk through this table, I wanted to show you kind of how these enrichments work so you can understand kind of the structure of these tables and how they operate. So if you click add enrichment, you can see here that this enrichment panel pops up and you can type in a specific data point. Let's say, for example, a person's work email. And if you click on it, it actually shows you an aggregation of all the different data providers you can use to find their work email that waterfall one after another. And so you can use these to find, for example, work emails at a higher data accuracy than any other tool out there because of the fact that it's waterfalling every tool on the market. So there are both normal enrichments like the ones I just showed you, and then AI agents. So to the point I was making before, there's an agent in Clay called Claygent. Pretty creative nomenclature there, I guess. But the point of Claygent is it allows you to scrape the internet for very niche information, which is what I'm going to show you now. So this is doing a bunch of research on a specific group of leads that I've imported into this Clay table. And you can see the first thing I did was I didn't have their LinkedIn profile, which for those who've used Clay before know it's the basis for a lot of data finding within the tool. So the first thing I was able to do was I was able to go to Claygent and say, act as an expert researcher. Here's a person's name. Here's a person's email. Go find me their LinkedIn. And after running this, all I did was prompt the AI agent, click save and run, and it found me the person's LinkedIn profile at an incredibly high accuracy, as you can see here. From there, we can use another enrichment to enrich the person's profile. And so all I did was throw in that LinkedIn profile that I found previously. And now if I click on this person's information, I have all of their LinkedIn info immediately at my fingertips. You can see all of their experience, all of their past experience, their summary, their description, where they work, their job title, etc. So now that you have a general idea of how Clay actually works with their enrichments, I'm going to kind of just quickly run through the use cases on what these things are actually doing to show you how it can be used specifically for marketing and marketing ops. So this one did a bunch of research on people and essentially threw it all into a Google Doc automatically and sent it to a sales team. So you can see here that we ran the enrichments. We found their LinkedIn profile. We enriched them. We have their title, their past companies, their past titles at other companies. We have the company summary of where they currently work. Then we found their company's LinkedIn information, threw that all into a table. Then we got their company size, industry description. Then we used an agent to go find the company's revenue. Then we use another agent to specifically segment this person or into several different ICP segments. And so we just prompted it to say, hey, segment it into one of these three categories based on the information I feed you. And you can feed individual columns into these prompts and then output their ICP automatically. Then I can even have it explain to me why that person fits this ICP segment. Another example is I actually fed information about Clay into an AI prompt and had it output use cases for the specific person on how they could use Clay to me. And then I sent it all through Zapier into a Google Doc for sales team members to use before getting on calls. So the idea here was somebody books a call, you do an insane amount of research on the person automatically, and it sends that person immediately a Google Doc with all the information they could possibly want on a prospect. So moving on to yet another use case, lead scoring. So I'm sure pretty much anybody who's worked in MarOps knows how much of a pain advanced lead scoring can be. Obviously, a lot of tools have their own like internal mechanisms that can do it based on basic firmographic data. But a lot of the time it's tough to score on complex data without it being like an absolute mess. And so that's what Clay is really helpful for. So you can set up a Clay table that every time somebody visits your website or every time somebody engages with you on social media or fills out a form or attends a webinar, they can automatically get webhooked into a Clay table. You can enrich them for a bunch of information, define scoring criteria and weights in their own individual columns, like I have in this situation, and then find additional data on these people or companies, like, for example, their revenue, their employee count in specific roles, the sort of tech stack they're using, and then eventually use AI to output a final score and then upload that immediately to your Salesforce. And you can see here, if I wanted to do that, it's very easy to update or create a record in my Salesforce based on these inbound leads. So you can see how powerful and custom a tool it can be. Like I essentially created my own scoring model in this case, put in all the criteria I wanted, and then the AI does the rest. And this was probably built in a few hours, which is why Clay is such a powerful tool. I need to check, see how good on time I am. Okay, I think I should be good. Okay, so another thing I wanted to show you is kind of back to the social media influencer point I was making before. You can import and find a lot of data in Clay that makes it super powerful. So obviously, if you're running some sort of influencer campaign, it's kind of a pain to manually aggregate lists of influencers that you think are a good fit and then reach out to the ones that you think are actually worth engaging with you or your company. And so this table immediately found social media influencers, and I can show you exactly what I searched. I just said between 10,000 and 50,000 followers that work in AI and sales are on Instagram, and I only wanted 100 results returned to me. And Clay was able to do it really quickly for a pretty low credit cost. Then I was able to go and enrich the social media influencers. So after I found their Instagram by using a Google search integration, so I just looked up the person's name and their Instagram, I was able to output their Instagram, then enrich their social media profile for essentially everything that they have on their profile, like the median amount of likes, median amount of comments, the amount of engagement that they're getting, their bio, all of their posts, all of their post media, and all of their post captions, and output that immediately into a Clay table. Then I was able to create a custom AI prompt that gave me a fit score on these influencers. And so I was able to pretty much just say, this is all that I'm looking for. Here's a high level of my product. Tell me what they are on a scale of 1 to 100 in terms of fit, and then rank these influencers in terms of fit and give me a reasoning as to why. And so again, and then find their emails And then I even created a custom email sequence that automatically sent to a sequencer that sent an email to these influencers saying, hey, would you like to collaborate with us? So yeah, obviously these tables can get somewhat complicated, and I know I'm kind of like half speed running through them, but you can probably imagine the amount of things that you can do with this tool. It is pretty absurd, and it's super powerful. So the last one I wanted to quickly show you was and kind of show you tell you like a background story on this one. So essentially, I missed a meeting with a prospect because I like completely just forgot, and the calendar never reminded me. And so I was like, I need to make a table to make up for this to this prospect. Like I need to make something that's gonna like blow him away enough to be like, okay, it's okay that he missed a meeting. Um, so it was essentially fine. So what I did is I got a list of all of his, or not all of, but 100 sample ICP members. I found the company's tech stack, specifically integrations that connected to this person's tech. So like I found the prospects integration partners, searched them on their prospects, and outputs 3 of the integrations that they have. Then I use an AI agent to find all of their prospects' customer service issues because they're a customer service company. I found a list of personalized benefits that their product could provide prospects based on the customer service issues that they were currently providing, and then found all the ways in which you could contact customer service. Then I found a list of people who work at the companies using Clay, put them into a new table, and found their emails. And then you can, of course, use these emails for an outreach campaign, either automated or manual. And then I scraped all of his social engagement and his company's and his CEO's social engagement. And then I validated them for ICP fit to obviously reach out to anybody who's a warm lead in their socials. So those are a few examples of how you can use Clay. I wanted to make sure I had enough time to run through them with potentially any questions, but hopefully this is helpful. And obviously open to walking through anything if
Super
necessary.
insightful. Thank you so much, Patrick. Let's address a couple of questions that we received from our audience now in real time and also before the session. So, question from Tony, data quality availability in Europe. And the second one, data compliance, GDPR.
Yeah, so they're completely compliant. Like Clay itself and all of their integration partners are completely compliant with GDPR, so you don't have to worry about that. However, it is worth noting that data quality is slightly lower in Europe just because of the data restrictions that are available there. So I will say it is the best data you can find for data in Europe, but it will be worse than trying to find, like, let's say, US-based prospects and information.
Question from Karen, what influence on Clay will there be from recent events from LinkedIn blocking companies like Apollo?
Yeah, this is a great question. And like every single one of our clients asked us this when we got on calls with them recently. So it's important to note a few different things. The first thing is that LinkedIn cannot stop companies from scraping their platform. They can only stop companies from actually being on their platform, like having a profile. And the reason for this is LinkedIn obviously wanted to prevent companies from scraping. They took this to court and they lost several times in cases where they would say, hey, like we're suing this business for scraping. The government decided every single time that it is legal to scrape LinkedIn data. And so a lot of these data providers will continue to do what they've been doing. LinkedIn just is kind of backlashing against them by deleting their profile. So Apollo, Seamless, I believe, like Growth Machine is another example of companies that have recently been banned on LinkedIn for those who aren't aware, but banned on like their profiles were banned, but their scrapers are still working perfectly fine and they're still actively working as companies. So it shouldn't actually affect the quality of the data. It's just going to affect like the accounts of some businesses that use LinkedIn data. And it's also worth noting Clay doesn't scrape their own LinkedIn data, so I think they're probably safe.
Patrick, it's really rare to see Clay for marketing ops, marketing, and generally this type of use cases. I'm curious, what are you seeing in terms of your customers and generally the requested coming from folks? Do marketers use Clay?
Well, the short answer is yes, they definitely do. I would say a good probably like 30 to 40% of the main points of contact at our clients are marketing heads, marketing leads. And so there's a few ways in which they use them. The first thing is for lead aggregation and cleaning and scoring. And so you can imagine, especially if you're like a head of marketing, it's really tough to get a great view on like clean data of people who are engaging with your different marketing initiatives. So like let's just say, for example, you have a website that gets a bunch of viewers. You have a webinar that has a bunch of signups. You have a form on your website where people do filling, and you have a bunch of social engagement. It's really tough to get all of those different sources, put them in one place, clean up the data, and figure out whether they're actually worth reaching out to or not. And oftentimes, a good portion of those people aren't worth reaching out to. Maybe only 10 to 20% of them are. And so Clay is incredibly good at aggregating all of this data, scoring it, cleaning it, and then sending it to a HubSpot or a Salesforce or wherever you actually operate, let's say as a team. So we've found that actually not a lot of let's say like within a company, maybe only one or two people are actually within Clay. A lot of it's syncing to Salesforce or HubSpot, so salespeople and marketing people have a better source of truth with more clean data. So that's one great example. Of course, another one would be for influencer campaigns, as I showed you a second ago. Another great use case would be creating programmatic web pages or doing SEO work or even copywriting based on individual things. Like Clay, all of Clay's SEO is actually done using Clay. So if you look up the revenue of a company, likely in the first couple pages, if they're a large tech company, Clay's SEO page for that will come up, and they're doing that using Clay, programmatically making web pages and putting them on the Webflow. So there's a ton of use cases. I mean, it can connect to so much, like the possibilities are pretty much endless.
Really cool. How does the Clay data integrate with Salesforce and HubSpot?
Yeah, so Clay Data syncs incredibly well with both of those providers. They have native integrations with them. So what Clay can do is it can import data from those things on a periodic basis. So for example, let's say you have a list view in Salesforce that you want to have updating Clay every day. You can have that done very easily. So you could import a list view into Clay directly from Salesforce and then have it update daily. It can also export data back into those two sources. So for example, if you did a bunch of enrichment and cleaning and scoring and made the data look pretty again and actually functional, you can send that immediately back to Clay. So there's a great use case there because you can essentially import data programmatically into Clay, clean it, score it, enrich it, and then send it back, creating a like perfect feedback loop of constantly clean Salesforce or HubSpot data. So you don't have to like treat Salesforce like a rock of bad data, like what usually people do with it.
Another question from our community here. What's the biggest challenge teams face when automating lead segmentation, and how does Clay solve it?
Yeah, so there are a few different challenges I'd say teams face. The first thing is finding a system that's able to do it reliably and consistently. And so as I'm sure anybody in like even especially like a more of a mid-market enterprise business has seen, most lead scoring mechanisms either have one of two compromises. Either they're very simple and they're not scoring for as many like let's say complex data points, or they're not super consistent in the sense that they can't find the data consistently and accurately enough for you to score in them. So those are two problems that are faced, I'd say, by most teams. Like for example, you can do lead scoring in tools like 6sense. I know you can do it on Marketo. So there are a lot of tools that have lead scoring, but the problem is the data is very basic. You can't really find niche data. Like I could score based on like the CTA text of the button on their contact page if I wanted to in Clay. And so there's that. And then of course the fact that it takes a lot of time if you're going to do complex lead scoring to do it one by one. So Clay automates that process with better data and it allows you to upload that information, of course, to whatever product you're using anyway. So I would say that that's probably how it benefits the most.
Next up, how does Clay handle cross-channel data inconsistencies when enriching context?
Yeah, so I mean that's a great question, especially considering that like as I mentioned before, you're aggregating data from a lot of different sources. So what Clay can do is cross-check data from its internal data tools, like for example, the enrichment providers that I demonstrated to you in Clay, to ensure that the data you're actually getting from these other tools is accurate. So for example, if you have a Salesforce instance that's kind of like rotting away with bad data and you import that data into Clay, likelihood is most of the people, or at least some of the people in your Salesforce instance, don't have the same job, or they don't work at the same company, or something's changed about them, right? So you can use Clay to enrich these people for their current up-to-date data and then cross-check it against a tool like Salesforce that you had previously, update the data, and then send it back to that original tooling. So it allows you to essentially, like, let's say, gut check or verify the data coming from other tools, and then, of course, normalize it to send it to a source of truth of some kind.
Another one from Karen here. You're an expert. What is the lift for a company getting started and maintaining on your own?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I'd say this is honestly the biggest barrier to entry with Clay that anybody faces. Is as you can probably tell by the stuff I was just demonstrating, it's not super easy to learn. It's also not super easy to master. So it takes some time to do so. So I'd say the complexity, or let's say the lead time in you setting up Clay and implementing it and maintaining it for your company is completely contingent on the complexity of the tables that you're building. With that being said, I would say if you want to learn Clay pretty quickly, they have a university on their website. So I would recommend checking it out. It's completely free and you can learn Clay that way. And secondly, I would say it takes probably, if you watch that university and you play around with the tool, a few weeks to a few months, depending on what you're building out, to get the tool completely down. And that might scare some people away, but there are a lot of services that help you set it up. Like, for example, I run an agency that helps set up Clay for companies. That's like, the whole basis of the business is Clay's complicated. Just hire somebody like us who knows how to use it to do it for you. So you can either hire a business to help you set that up and kind of like, I don't know, tee up your initial Clay instance, or you can learn it using the variety of boot camps, YouTube videos, universities available for Clay, and get it set up. But I think like the main thing I want to touch on though is like even if you don't want to hire an agency, I would like highly suggest trying to learn it. I think it's worth the effort. There are easier tools to use out there, but they're not nearly as flexible or powerful when you're setting up like custom workflows for your business. And so that's kind of like the main draw.
Question from Andy. What different intent sources does Clay integrate with?
So Clay, and this is actually a great point that I might not have touched on as well as I wanted to. Clay integrates with literally every piece of technology that has webhook and API functionality, every single one of them. So they might natively integrate with a lot of different intent data. So for example, like I use a tool all the time called Trigify that scrapes social intent data and gives it to me into a Clay table, and it natively integrates with Trigify. But it also integrates with everything else as long as you know how to set up the webhooks or the APIs within Clay. And so that's what makes it so powerful again is and somewhat difficult to learn in the more advanced stages is you can connect anything to it. You just have to figure out like what are the API docs telling me to do to connect it to Clay. But yeah, it can connect with again essentially anything. So if you have like for example Common Room, a great intent data aggregator that you want to connect to Clay, you just use its webhook and API functionality and it'll do it for you.
Question from Nicholas. Where do you see Clay focusing next?
Great question. So, I'm currently in the Clay offices right now. I know the team super well, and I have been hearing a lot of talks, just like specifically around their fundraising, where they've kind of positioned themselves as a tool for growth. And so, my take is, I think they're going to start branching out into things like marketing, for example, that they haven't really been going after. Clay is again been mostly advertised as a sales tool, but I really think marketing and growth is the next use case that it's going to operate within. So, I think Clay is going to go kind of towards the entire growth sphere, not just sales itself.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Again, where should our community go to support you? And you have an agency. What clients do you work with? And yeah, what's the qualification?
Yeah, so feel free to check out my LinkedIn if you're able to type out my entire name into the search bar. And then I have a website called thekiln.com that you can check out for our agency. We mostly work with mid-market to enterprise businesses on implementing Clay. So if that's you and you're interested in talking about how you can use it, feel free to reach out. And appreciate you having me on, Julia.
Thanks again.